Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Mike Norvell, the Florida State Seminoles, getting active in the transfer portal, landing a massive commitment from former four-star wide receiver from LSU, Jalen Brown. And the first thing you got to know about Jalen Brown is absolute burners. Coming out of high school, 10.6 100-meter dash time. This was one of the fastest players from that 2023 class. He's coming over to Florida State and going to really provide that vertical down the field threat to this Florida State offense. And I couldn't think of a better quarterback for Jalen Brown to be catching footballs from in 2024 than DJU, a guy that has a massive arm, wants to use it down the field. Jalen Brown combines elite speed with really good ball tracking to be one of the more dynamic deep threats from that 2023 class. And we said this earlier yesterday morning, Florida State sounds to be gearing up for a massive push in the transfer portal, a ton of targets, a ton of visitors on campus this week. I want to talk about a few more names that we didn't get to yesterday morning and also talk about Jalen Brown and what he brings to this Florida State offense. Before we get into it, just want to say thank you to you guys. And this has been truly a blast tracking all of these commitments for the Florida State Seminoles, and the amount of support you guys have shown the boys has been amazing. Cannot thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into Jalen Brown. And this is a guy that, I remember talking about when he committed to LSU, and as a Michigan fan myself, wanted Jalen Brown to wind up in Ann Arbor. To give you a little feel of Jalen Brown, now he hadn't played much as a freshman at LSU, but when he was coming out of high school, was largely considered one of the more dynamic down the field threats in that 2023 class. When you combined a 10.6 100-meter dash time with how well he could track a football vertically down the field, that's when you get one of those special caliber wide receivers. And you look at this Florida State wide receiver room, Mike Norvell has put an emphasis on trying to build some more talent in that room. Obviously, losing guys like Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson, Jaheim Bell, I think Florida State is really happy with what they have, right? Guys like Destin Hill, Hakeem Williams, Kentron. But adding a guy like Jalen Brown is just adding another weapon to this Florida State offense. And in that Florida State offense, they want to attack every blade of grass in the football field. And a guy like Jalen Brown really allows you to attack that deeper third with a massive amount of speed. But more importantly than just Jalen Brown making plays, he represents a wide receiver that defenses have to respect. And when you have a wide receiver that there needs to be a safety over top of him, and if there's not, it's probably going to be a touchdown. Like, that allows for other players in this Florida State offense to really thrive in those intermediate route trees, right? When safeties have to be and have so much respect for a down the field threat like Jalen Brown, it's going to open stuff up for the tight ends and guys like Hakeem Williams to work more that intermediate portion of the football field. Jalen Brown not only bringing a ton of playmaking ability to this Florida State offense, but also a guy that is going to help the quarterback, but also the wide receivers around him as well. And again, hadn't played much at LSU, but you look at the reason why he didn't play much. And Florida State fans know plenty about LSU. They have a loaded wide receiver room. There wasn't really a ton of opportunity for a guy like Jalen Brown to playing behind multiple NFL wide receivers. I expect Jalen Brown to come into this Florida State offense and really make some noise in 2024. And we talk about Florida State and what they're building. You look at this wide receiver room, guys like Hakeem Williams, Destin Hill, now Jalen Brown, all going into their second year of college football. Not only is this wide receiver room extremely talented heading into 2024, but you start looking at 2025 and in 2026 with guys like Luke Kromenhoek and Brock Glenn, they're going to have a ton of targets to get to work with. And we talked about this Florida State program and really making a push this weekend in the transfer portal. Talked about a ton of prospects that I was really intrigued by yesterday morning. Want to talk about a few more names that have been added to the visitor list. And I want to stick at that wide receiver position and talk about former Alabama wide receiver Malik Benson, who is also scheduled to be on campus for Florida State Sunday afternoon. Now, I think he's taken a visit to Gainesville for the Florida Gators today on Saturday, now scheduled to be in Tallahassee on Sunday. We talked about Jalen Brown. We talked about the speed that Jalen Brown has with the 10.6 100-meter dash time. Malik Benson, even faster. 10.4 coming out of high school. Now, the story with Malik Benson, spent 2 years at the JUCO ranks, where he absolutely tore it up, caught for over 2,000 yards, goes to Alabama. In fall camp, there was a ton of buzz around Malik Benson potentially being the dude for Alabama in 2023. And Malik Benson flashed some really good things and played a lot of football for Alabama. It doesn't necessarily show up on the stat sheet, but played some really good football for Alabama in 2023. I think transferring, looking to play in a little bit more of a dynamic offense, have a little bit more of an opportunity to be a playmaker at 6'1", 200 pounds, combined with a 10.4 100-meter dash time. That's one of the fastest times that you see, for regardless of position, regardless of player. Malik Benson represents a guy that not only can win creating separation, but more importantly, winning with the ball in his hands, right? When you run that 10.4 100-meter dash time and you are almost 200 pounds, you're kind of a force for defensive backs to bring down. And you've seen Florida State try to put an emphasis on getting the football to playmakers in space. A guy like Malik Benson, I kind of see as a dynamic player that Mike Norvell and this offensive staff will be trying to get the football to in a lot of different ways. And what excites me most about Malik Benson is not only did he flash some real talent at Alabama in 2023, but was a guy that I think has a lot of meat left on the bone. And we talk about this a lot in the transfer portal. I feel like sometimes a lot of people just assume that player at Alabama in 2023, that's what he is. That's what Florida State's getting. A lot of these guys are still getting developed, right? Malik Benson spent 2 years at the JUCO ranks. This year was his first time playing Power 5 football. There's a lot more refinement in terms of route running and polishing his game that I think Malik Benson can have. So not only you might be getting a phenomenal football player right now, but Malik Benson, under the tutelage of Mike Norvell and that staff, who've done a really good job developing wide receivers the last couple of years, especially from the transfer portal. I think you're really excited about what Malik Benson could be for Florida State if he does commit and gets developed by a guy like Mike Norvell. So you look at this wide receiver position, you're feeling pretty good about the talent that's coming into this room. Another target for Florida State that I think Florida State fans should keep an eye on. We talked about Penny Boone, the transfer running back from Toledo. He ends up committing to Louisville, doesn't make it down to Tallahassee on his official. Another guy that it seems like Florida State might be pivoting to at that running back spot is Roydell Williams, another former Alabama player that really played some good football for Alabama in 2023, 111 carries, 560 yards, 5 yards per carry. You take a look at some of the deeper numbers, 373 of his 500 rushing yards come after contact. And we said what was so special about Penny Boone potentially joining that Florida State running back room was he balances out a guy like Tuafili really well. I think Roydell Williams, you can say the exact same things. 5'10", 214 pounds, thick lower half. He's a more physical downhill runner. You talk about trying to balance out this running back room and getting running backs that excel and can do a lot of different things. A guy like Roydell Williams and Lawrence Tuafili, I think, balance each other out at a really high level. I'd be extremely excited to see Roydell Williams come to Florida State, where you want to add some experience and depth to that running back room. Getting a fifth-year senior coming from Alabama certainly checks that box. And the last name that I didn't even know was planning on visiting Tallahassee but popped up on campus this morning, Tiwa Doria, I'm going to mess up the name, Doria. And this is a guy that I remember watching for West Virginia, probably 6'4", 280-pound defensive lineman, plays for West Virginia, or played for West Virginia in 2023. This was a guy that when I was watching an Oklahoma-West Virginia game, this guy's kind of a menace. And what I love most about him is, one, Florida State wants to beef up the trenches. Obviously, you're losing a couple guys to the NFL draft, Braden Fisk, Jared Verse, Fabian Lovett. You want to replace some of that depth and talent. A guy like Tiwa, 6'4", 280 pounds, he kind of lines up all over the field, had 5 sacks, 12 run stops in 2023 for West Virginia. I like him most in terms of what he can do in terms of the versatility. He's a guy that's athletic enough and a good enough mover to play that edge position, but also big enough and strong enough to play that 3-tech as well. And again, Florida State wants to get creative in terms of how they use those guys in that front seven. A guy like Tiwa, that you can kind of move all around the football field, would be really intriguing for Florida State to add, not only from a talent standpoint, but also from a depth standpoint, where Florida State is continuing to try to boost up that depth on that defensive line with some of those guys departing to the NFL draft. Now, circling back to Jalen Brown, this seems to be just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what Florida State is going to bring in the transfer portal. And I want to just note, Mike Norvell, we've had this conversation, is probably the best in the game, if not certainly in the top 3 in terms of head coaches and staffs that evaluate out of the transfer portal and get the best out of guys from the transfer portal. And you'll see a lot of people want to knock Mike Norvell and this Florida State staff from using the transfer portal too much. You're starting to see them. They brought in a phenomenal class in 2024 at the high school ranks. They're still going to use the transfer portal to supplement this roster. They've had a ton of success doing so. I wouldn't see that slowing down anytime soon, but you can feel confident that the guys that Florida State is bringing in, they're going to be playmakers for this Florida State team. Because again, year in, year out, Florida State has shown they know how to evaluate and get difference makers from the transfer portal. Jalen Brown, a guy that I think Florida State fans should be extremely excited about. Again, wanted to hop on, break it down. We might be breaking down a few more commitments for Florida State later today into this weekend. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.